For Science has easily my favorite dexterity stacking mechanism I've ever seen in a board game. And then it puts just a little bit too much game around it. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing For Science from Gray Fox Games, a dexterity, real-time, science, vaccine kind of whole shebang kind of situation of a game which you're trying to diagnose various diseases, going to the, I don't know what the term is, sequence. You're trying to sequence various diseases as you solve the various diseases, as you go through a step-by-step procedure in which you're going to try to figure out what you need to do, then build it, then validate it, then turn that into points that you can use for your universal vaccine, which will slowly move you up your respective charts, at which point you'll win the game with that whole 15-minute timer and potentially events and things and mutations and all those other things going on. That's a lot. Let's go through that one step at a time. The basic core building blocks of this game, get it? Building blocks, because we have all these building blocks. We do indeed have building blocks. The core building blocks of For Science come down to trying to stack things together in a specific sequence that fulfills the diseases themselves and the mutations in play. So let's go ahead and start at the very basic level by just grabbing some diseases and starting off the bat without focusing too much on what you should or shouldn't be doing. Let's just see what we can grab over here, just putting this together so you can get an idea of what it is we're trying to do. The actual rules here we're kind of ignoring, but I just want to show you how this plays out. So right now, if you have this design over here, you're trying to build something out in a way in which this has to touch this, but nothing else. So let's go ahead and put that down like this. Let's put this like this. We're going to grab this, which has to touch this over here, which has to touch this, unfortunately. This has to touch the ground. We have to have this, which touches this, which touches this, which has to touch that. So now things get a little complicated a little quickly. This is going to be a real problem. We can do this. We can do this. We're going to go ahead and put this like this like that. That's still all kosher-ish. Yes, it's kosher, I think. Yep, kosher. We're going to go ahead and grab this over here, which needs to then touch this up over here, which then needs to touch this over here, which then needs to have this on top of this, which should fulfill everything we're trying to do like so. That should fulfill everything. Let's go ahead and show you this from the front. This design right here should fulfill everything. Let's go ahead and show you that from the bottom. From the bottom, we have the purple. If we mirror it a bit, we have the purple on this side over here. We have the blue touching the green's touching the ground, the blue's not touching the ground. From there, we have the blue, which touches, the purple touches the green and the blue, and the red touches the purple and nothing else, which both connect to the orange block, which connects those two. And then finally, from top there, we have an orange block and a purple that touch the orange block, and then a red which touches the two things on top, but nothing else. Hopefully that all made sense. There's a specific stacking mechanism in play in which you're trying to fulfill those type of goals as you go through this. You have your disease cards, you have your design cards, which will help you sequence the disease, and you're trying to get all that done. But there's additional layers or elements at play because you have the diseases you're actually trying to solve. Ignoring for a second this pile of blocks over here, you actually have the diseases you're trying to solve which have specific requirements. So for example, this disease over here has to have a minimum length of 2, because of the lab that it's in, and then it also has to have at least one red touching a red or purple touching a purple, which means this disease structure over here would not solve that. So you're trying to gather these design cards and place them out in order to fulfill the disease, but the diseases all have different requirements around them. We have this disease, which has to have 2+ design cards granting 0 or 1 research on them, which again, we don't have that. We do. We have 2 design cards over here that grant 1 research, so we're fine over there. Over here, this vector alpha over here has 6 different block shapes. Each block shape may be on at most half of the design cards. Each of these diseases have a different rule as far as how they're going for, and then there's also mutations. Mutations that will start off in this lab one over here, but mutations that can also show up in other labs as well. While building this cure, put this card on top of the highest block in the build, throwing in a little bit of a wrench into the mix as you try to build these diseases in the specific labs. And you are trying to build them in the specific labs. You're going to gather these cards over here, you're going to place them into the specific labs, building all the way off the camera shot over there, but you can get an idea of what's going on here as you try to put together each player, all the players at the table cooperating to gather a lab, to gather disease cards, to start putting things down and starting to sequence it. And once the design is validated, the specific order you go with is you put down the design on the table and you start putting everything out. Once the design on the table matches what you think is the disease and the mutation, you can then have another player validate that, and then you go through the process of starting to build. Once you start building it, you go through the process of the building it, and then you have another player validate that your build is complete, all the while going through these steps in order to cure as many diseases as possible. When you cure diseases, you're going to look at both the lab and the disease cards to go ahead and see what you get in terms of these symbols over here and how you can turn those into universal vaccine tiles. You're going to gather those universal vaccine tiles, you're going to go ahead and match them up to their own separate little mini game. Let's clear these off to the side. Your own separate little mini game as you take these and match them up. Look at that. We managed to lock in one of those, so we're going to move up this track over here. We have this over here. We're going to go ahead. We have to enclose them off. We have that's enclosed over there. We're going to gather another. We're going to spend the other 5 points of research to gather one of these and one of these. And we're going to go ahead and try putting these in somewhere where they actually help us. Hopefully, maybe, possibly, hoping that we can possibly get what we need out of here. If we close this off over here, we now have 2 points of the blue that we can go ahead and put this over there. And you can rearrange these as necessary to try to get what you want out of it. If I put this over here, that closes in a point of red, and you're constantly spending these points in order to earn these universal vaccines, which will move you up these tracks over here, and as you get to the required number, eventually you win the game. That's 90% of what's going on in Force Science. A few other things are in the mix. There's also a deck of event cards that, depending if you're playing with them or not, you'll have the timer that comes with the game, and there's soundtracks you can use as well, and whenever the little ding goes off, you'll draw an event card and see what happens, and we got, what do we got? Give me a second here. We have unstable compounds. All building players drop a block onto their build from 4 inches up. Yeah, that's a little annoying. You kind of have to drop your build. Your whole thing falls apart. We have a discard a card granting +2 or +3 design from each unverified cure design. So these are all going to throw things into the mix. That will be something you add in as you get used to the game. We also have the concept of wasting design cards we didn't heavily get into. The idea that as you get rid of design cards, as you waste them, you'll put them into the lab over there, which will possibly cause mutations, but you can also spend things to get rid of them, to clear them. A few other peripheral things going on, but at a high level overview, you have diseases, you have mutations, you are designing the cure for the disease, you are then building out the cure, you are validating along the way that all these steps are done correctly, you are earning those points, putting them into universal vaccines, and then earning the various things you'll need to get up the yellow, blue, and red tracks in Force Science. Let's start off with ease of play. The rules are actually pretty easy to go through for the most part. I would say the biggest problem, we'll get into this more in the review part of things, there's a lot of steps going on around what is a fairly simple dexterity game. Steps that don't necessarily add quite as much. Oh, and we also forgot, by the way, the players have tons of roles over here, specific roles with their abilities in your own personal private lab. There's other things going on. We covered most, not everything. But ease of play, the rules are for the most part pretty simple. It's 7 or 8 pages of rules, not a ton to go into. Teaching the game, not the hardest either. Playtime comes in, well, it's a timed game, so it comes in at 15 minutes per game, as far as assuming you're playing it that way, assuming you're playing with the timer and all that. And table space is not that bad. I mean, what you see over here is what you get. It adds, a few more cards up top, not a ton of space per extra player. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 6 player game. I have played this at 2, 3, and 4 players. I would say that I think 3 is probably the sweet spot for me. 2 feels like there's not enough going on. 4 already started to feel a bit messy. 3 was a good mix of people doing their own different things, of validating, of building, of designing, of going through all the steps, working together as a team. So for me, 3 was the sweet spot, but honestly, 2, 3, and 4 were all fine. I would be hesitant to play it at 1 and hesitant to play it at 5, but 3 was my sweet spot there. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see how it's not liking, off the bat, my favorite thing of this game, my favorite part, not even a question, is the specific dexterity building mechanic. The way you build in this game, the way you have to stack the things, provides an interesting puzzle that I haven't seen done this way in other games, and that I really, really like the way it's done in this game. I really like the way everything does collide together, everything does work together, as far as how you have to construct something in which you're trying to connect all these pieces in ways where this has to connect to that, that ties into that, this piece touches those 3 pieces. It presents a very interesting building mechanism as you try to figure out how to make it all work with the block shapes on the table, as well as the specific requirements, and there's almost always an opportunity. I would say almost always. I think there's always an opportunity. There's always a way to get it done, but it often requires a degree of brain power, and it often does have someone else at the table being like, you didn't do that correctly, that piece is touching that piece, and it's not supposed to touch that piece, and this piece is over there. It does require a degree of trying to visualize out the connection points you have on this card and how that translates into a 3D structure on the table. It is an excellent dexterity building mechanic that I like easily the most from any stacking game I've ever personally played. And there's a balance of making everything else work around it. There's a balance of the disease and the restrictions of the disease being, and then the mutations bring something else into play. And you're doing all of this to actually go ahead and earn points towards the universal vaccine, which you're then going to use to slide up the tracks. And there's all these other things going around that engine. And the universal vaccine puzzle means you're constantly working on this, even as you're winning in other areas. You're constantly trying to rearrange and adjust the universal vaccine to provide the most efficient thing, because you are running on a timer, which means you need to make sure that just because you're doing well doesn't mean you're actually winning. Sure, you're going ahead, you're doing these things, you've cured 4 diseases, it's all great, but if your universal vaccine is scattered and not working together, there's still a part of the game that you have to balance. And all of this is what being done under a timer, which keeps keeps everything moving. It keeps the game moving fast. It keeps the tension at play. It adds a reason why you're all working cooperatively together to make this all work, and why it's not a competitive engine. It is a fun, fast-paced, frenetic stacking game with a variety of elements that all work together nicely, with a caveat. Which brings us to the things we don't like, or things I don't like, which is specifically the fact, as much as I love this dexterity mechanism, as much as I love this stacking mechanism, and I think it is the best implementation of a stacking mechanism I've seen in a board game so far, I do feel like the other elements, while in one way they add, in another way they also take away from my experience. I love this stacking mechanism. I love it. I want to see it done differently, more, somewhere else. I feel like this game, For Science, adds a lot of other elements in order to make this game bigger and better and more, just more. And I think they did so to a degree, but at the same time, they also took a little bit away from the simplicity and the elegance of what is a very clean mechanism in the game. I like this whole stacking thing a lot. I've said it multiple times. I'm going to keep saying it throughout the final thoughts and everything. And I think the rest of the game around it is okay. It adds more to the game, but I'd almost rather that For Science be less of a fully fleshed game and more of a just focusing on this one element and trying to double down and triple down on that as opposed to everything else around it. As far as I can see others not liking, really I'm just going to focus on the mechanics over here. This is a real-time dexterity stacking game. If you don't like real-time games, well, the truth is if you don't like real-time games, there is a variant where you can play without the real-time, but I think this would take away from the experience. And then if you don't like stacking games, well, this is a stacking game. It's both got the logical aspect of trying to figure out what it is you're stacking, as well as the actual process in which you try to make sure that this touches this, which touches that, and connects to that. Meanwhile, you're trying to go, and it falls down. It's going to be a stacking game. It's going to be a stacking game with a logical element attached to it. As far as final thoughts on For Science, you've mostly heard it by now. I really like the stacking element here. I really like the way they give you an interesting puzzle, and I kind of wish they took away other elements of the game to just focus on this. Similar to the way that other games like Junk Art are more focused purely on just the stacking and not focused on so many peripheral things. I think For Science takes a few too many other elements and mixes it together in the effort of giving you a more fleshed out experience, and I think to a certain extent it succeeds for players looking for that. Because as much as I just like the stacking element and I want to see it done, like I honestly, genuinely, I have fun grabbing 5 cards, just going ahead and creating a whole stack of cards on the table, just sliding them all out, and then just going through the process of just building out that tree and trying to figure out the most efficient, effective way to build that out, even on my own as a little solo puzzle. I enjoy that puzzle. I like that. The rest of the game around it adds a little too much, a little bit more than the experience I'm looking for in this game, and that's why for me this one's a 3.5 out of 5. I like it, it does a lot of things well, but I feel they added too much around the element that I like the best, and I think the other things, while they are fine, don't heavily embrace the unique aspect of the way things stack in this game. I feel like I'm being very repetitive on this point because that really is how I feel about For Science. I love, 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 love the way they designed the stacking mechanism. And the rest of the game around it, I just kind of like. As far as other game recommendations, if you're looking for something that leans a little more heavily directly into stacking and dexterity and all that, Junk Art. Junk Art's a game that still manages to deliver without these standard, typical blocks you might expect, but managing to give you unique, weird shapes that give you a fun little dexterity element as you try to figure out as far and how high you can get and how long you can stay in the game. And then secondly, Minara. If you're looking for a game that gives you a bit more of a puzzly element to the way you're stacking things, the way you're making everything work, Minara is another cooperative dexterity stacking game that is worth looking into. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.